Our next speaker is Alan Clark. Alan received his bachelor's degree in wildlife sciences at the University of Maine. He went on to spend the next 23 years at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife with a one-year career break to get a master's degree in wildlife management from Virginia Tech. Since then, he's spent 16 years with the UDWR, that's the Utah Department of Wildlife Resources, including as wildlife chief and assistant director, and now he's currently the director of Watershed Restoration Program. So thank you, Alan.
You shouldn't give people over 60 controls like this to try to figure out what we're doing. What I'd like to do, just real quick, how many of you have ever heard of the Watershed Restoration Initiative? Good, I can cut the whole first half of my talk out, or go through it really, really fast. How many of you ever put a project in through or been involved in putting projects in? So still a pretty good number of people, and for those who haven't, gives you a perspective of this program in Utah and the progress that we hope we're making, we think we're making in this process. So what I'd like to do is give you a real quick overview of what the Watershed Restoration Initiative is, and then talk a little bit about how the program interacts with fire. And a little bit about being the director of this program. Rory Reynolds did this for a number of years from the time that the program was started. If you have any really hard questions, Rory's a really good person to ask them of. I kind of describe my job as it's kind of like 30 years ago, almost all vehicles had a hood ornament. I don't know if how many of you remember that. They had a hood ornament on the front. Had no purpose other than for marketing, because they always showed a picture. Every commercial of a vehicle always showed that picture for marketing purposes, and it was the first thing that hit the bugs when you were going down the road. So that was kind of the purpose of the hood ornament. So I'm kind of the hood ornament of the Watershed program, and we'll talk a little bit about that and what we do here. Okay, if I figure out the right one. Right, it's supposed to advance it. What happens if it doesn't? Okay. I talked too long and the batteries went dead. How about if I just do this? Okay. So we'll go with arrows. So a little bit real quick, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Watershed Restoration Initiative is, what it does, how did it come about, how we're doing kind of in the big picture, and then the last part we'll talk a little bit about Watershed Restoration Initiative and as it relates to kind of 4 aspects of fire, and we'll do that. So the Watershed Restoration Initiative is sponsored, although I work for the Department of Natural Resources. It's really sponsored by a consortium of the land management agencies and interests in the state. It was founded in the UPCD, it's called this Utah Partners for Conservation Development. It was founded in 1993. In 2003, the group didn't meet all the time. They kind of would come together when there was an issue that brought them together. In 2003, we were looking at drought, very severe drought with statewide sagebrush die-off that was exacerbated by some insect issues with sagebrush. And so there was quite a concern, are we going to have any sagebrush left in Utah? And they launched this Watershed Restoration Initiative at that time. That's the group that makes up UPCD, to give you an idea. So there's a Utah, US, there's a lot of different groups involved in that, but it's a pretty broad group, so it gets a pretty broad support in a state like Utah, where it represents a lot of the land ownership and a lot of those people that are managing on the land. This was their mission, what they laid out. The mission was written typical of some governmentese. I don't know who wrote it, but it's a typical government mission statement. But I pulled 2 statements out of there that I think summarize really what it's about: coordinating and sharing concerns and priorities, and then collaborating to implement action. So collaborating is a key thing. It's a partnership. They identified some threats that they were interested in looking at. The same suspect list that you'd get for threats, whether it's facing sage grouse now or other things that you see out there, but that was the concerns that they identified. So WRI then is a partnership-driven effort to conserve and restore and manage ecosystems all across the state in priority areas. And so there's some keywords. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on that. It's kind of a three-legged stool that it stands on, where it's trying to accomplish wildlife and biological diversity. It's trying to increase water quality and yield in the second driest state in the United States, and it's trying to look at opportunities for sustainable uses of our natural resources on private and public land in the state. So it focuses on that. And we work in conservation focus areas. I was a wildlife biologist for several years. I did all these neat little projects in my biologist district, and I go back and think about that now, and it was just kind of random acts of kindness you did on the landscape, and you probably couldn't even find them now. And so this program really focuses, we're going to work in focus areas. There are focus areas. This is actually 2 years old, so they're redone by the regional teams each year. They can modify, drop areas, put areas in. And when I give a long talk on this, I spend a fair amount of time talking about the focus areas and what that accomplishes, but we're going to skip over that. We have a lot of supporting infrastructure. A lot of different people participate. To give you an idea, there would be no watershed restoration initiative without our partners. I'm the only paid employee that works for the group, so I'm it. But yet, if you look at who's involved, this past year we had 98 different agencies and organizations that participated or provided funding for projects around the state. So it really is a true partnership effort. It also is a true bottom-up effort. Beyond setting some very basic guidelines and providing some broad services that we do, it really is the regional teams that do this. It's a bottom-up process. Regional teams are the ones who develop the projects in their regions. They give feedback to those people proposing projects. They rank the projects and then pass them up. And then we at the main office or offices, BLM or Forest Service, whoever it is, we find funding. So our job is to go find funding so that we can implement those projects. There's a lot of services provided that you can see there. Let me just focus on a couple, or one in particular, Great Basin Research Center, which is a unique thing we have in Utah that other states don't have, is we have this program that's there that includes a lot of different things. That's the Great Basin Research Center. If you've never been there, make a trip down. It's a great place to see. We have a seed warehouse there, so we store and can have our own seed available. We are part of the BLM seed network. So we actually can provide seed to federal agencies for reseeding too. That was an interesting story, but it took a while to work it out, but we were able to work it out. We have a lot of custom seed mixing that we do at the facility, so if you have a seed mix you want, it can be mixed there. We have equipment. Anybody that puts a project in the Watershed Restoration Initiative can use the equipment for free that goes out with it. So that's part of the benefit to somebody who wants to partner or participate in the initiative. Anchor chains, previous rangeland drills. We have a Geo-Database Web application. If you notice the date, December 7th, 2015, we're going to have a brand new system up and running that hopefully will be easier to use. They've used me as the standard. They figure if I can work in it, then anybody can work in it. So it's kind of that trade-off that we're doing. And so I'm the guinea pig for figuring out if we really can use this system. But it's a lot of, for those who've used the old one, it's a really lot nicer and easier to use. For those of you who'd like to get data, you'll be able to do your own data mining in the website. Everything will be open for people to be able to go in and access data. So when you want to look at some of the things we've done. That's just the project sheet. It has a geographic process. This is our normal schedule that we follow in a year. Normally it's the first Monday in January that project proposals are due, but actually this year, because of the new database coming online, we kind of stretched the schedule out a little bit and gave people a couple extra weeks to get project proposals in. And then that's the whole process for getting through. So overall picture, this is the one that we're really proud to share with people. And as I said, this is all a big partnership. So I haven't done a single project that you see on that map. Yet it's all done by our partners. Different people have presented here and we'll present at the next ones. But If you can see, we're up to about over 1.2 million acres, and that's the actual acres treated, not acres influenced, so it's the actual shapefiles of acres that we've worked on in Utah. And the two different programs kind of divided in half. The red polygons are fire rehab, where we've been involved with federal agencies or state agencies or private individuals with rehabbing after a fire, and the blue are kind of more standard projects. So anyway, now let me switch into kind of the fire part of this talk, which is what it's supposed to be about. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We kind of interact what I think are four different ways as far as it relates to fire. We look at, first of all, we feel like most of our projects reduce the risk of a destructive fire, because what we're doing is we're going into older age systems of one kind or another and trying to make them more resilient and resistant, trying to make them healthier. And so those are the kind of areas we treat. And so we would say we do a lot of that work on landscapes for different reasons. Some is that Brad already talked a little bit about BLM and their effort to reintroduce fire management into some of their systems, and so we get involved in that. But we're trying to get things back into a more natural pattern, a healthier pattern, getting things that are more resistant and resilient. Here's an example of what a typical one of those projects might look like. That's what it looked like ahead of time. High elevation, sagebrush area. This is what it might look like after you run a Dixie harrow through to treat that area. Another example, so it gives you an idea, and we also do a lot of monitoring, so there's a lot of monitoring data that goes along with these projects. So you can see what we did. We reduced sagebrush cover, increased forbs, and really increased perennial grasses in that particular treatment. Here's another one. This is a lop and scatter, where you put a hand crew out. I describe it, it kind of looks, in the old cartoons, you used to see the termites that would run across somebody would have a house and the termites would come and the house would fall down and it'd be just a door standing or something. If you're old enough, you'll remember those cartoons. And so some of these lop and scatter crews attack the landscape kind of like the termites did in the old thing. So this is what that site, and these are permanent plots, so this is exactly the same spot between the first and the second. So you can see what that looks like after the lop and scatter crew went in and did their work, 2008 versus 2011. Utah juniper gone, mountain sagebrush responded very well, and bitterbrush responded very well to that particular treatment. So those are kind of the general treatments or projects that the watershed restoration does. We also have a group of projects we do in riparian areas and streams, but since I'm talking about fire, we'll kind of focus on these today. Then we do projects that are really more imminent, looking at things. Now, Brad talked already about green stripping and efforts to do that. We get involved in helping fund and provide seed for green stripping projects. About 30 have been done, a few more now. Since then, that was actually based on FY14 through FY14, but since that's become an emphasis with sage grouse, there's more of those projects. We do fuels reduction projects. A lot of our projects are done in conjunction with the fuels programs and BLM and the Forest Service, and where we're really looking at kind of two general areas. One is stage 3 pinyon juniper, very closed, dense stands, carry a fire. Brad had some great photos of that. And then the other thing we look at is invasive species treatments, either tamarisk and Russian olive that really choke along waterways and that and can really burn and create issues for us. A lot of that's in the southeastern part of the state, around the Colorado and its tributaries. But then we also do these projects that are these cheatgrass projects and others. But to give you an idea, we went back through our database, and since FY10, it doesn't go clear back to 2006. We'll be able to tell you that answer in about another month, because we're going back as we make the conversion to the new database. We're able to categorize our projects and treatments a little differently. But we have about 350 high-risk fuels projects that we've done, where the focus was really at lowering that fuels level that was there in one way or another, and we've treated about 350,000 acres in the state that had that as really the focus, and other benefits, but that was really what we were trying to get at in a lot of those projects. Typical green strip project that you might see. There's going to be a talk later on talking about how do you figure out where to do green strips, which is another question and interesting one. This is a typical chaining project that we might do to eliminate high fuels area. This is before and after, just to give you an idea. This is what the project looked like before. This is what it looked like after. Wouldn't be a great sage-grouse project because of all the sprouts that are coming back in. But that's when also we'd use a lop and scatter crew to go back in and take out all those sprouts that are coming up from the pinyon juniper, mainly juniper there. The other thing we do is a fair amount of bullhog projects, and Brad talked about those and had some great before and afters, but here's an example. This is a Greenville bench project where we had before. This is what it looked like when we went in. Again, high risk of fuels, long history of a lot of fire starts in that area, and now this is what it looks like after that project was completed. So a lot of change in that. And again, the fuels, talked about the mulched material on the ground, but still much more easy to deal with a fire in that situation than others. This is Greenville 2012, and this gives you a little bit of comparison of what you started with and what you ended up with. Very typically, we get a jump in cheatgrass after we do these projects. Frequently that'll happen, but if you get either you have enough native plant seed in place that it's going to come back, or you do a good seeding, you can catch up with the cheatgrass after a few years, and so we've been somewhat successful doing that. And this is a typical Tamaris Russian olive removal project along a small stream in the southeastern part of the state, tributary to the Colorado, where we go in, remove those trees, and then replant. Those are cottonwoods that were replanted along there as far as a restoration effort. A little bit about fire rehab. That's kind of the other area that we get involved with our program. We kind of coordinate the effort across ownerships and provide seed to help out federal agencies that are doing rehab, or in the case of fires that burn on private and state lands, like SITLA lands, frequently the staff in some of the state agencies get involved in heading those projects up and doing them. And so we do a fair amount of that. Since 2006, we've been involved, the Watershed Restoration Initiative, in 192 fire rehab projects for a little over 500,000 acres. And by far the biggest year was the Milford Flat year. Almost a little bit over 200,000 acres that was done in that 1 year. Typical tools that we're involved in are those that we use: chainings and drills and flying on seed and those kinds of activities. We have been able to measure, as Brad talked about, and we've made some efforts. Paul Briggs with the BLM in the southwestern part of the state has been doing some work with his staff and looking at this, but we have a lot of examples, but we're actually trying to quantify what the effect is on fire starts and fire acres burned by doing these projects. And this just happens to be an example of a fire from a few years ago. It was originally a fire, 2002 fire seeding. The seeding did pretty well. We had a second fire, and the fire seeding, as you can see, ended up being the stopping point for the fire all the way along that whole area, both by the fire not burning as well and giving the crews a safe place to work. So those two things. So one of the things we say is that fire rehab is probably the best fire pre-suppression project you can do, is try to get in there and keep it from turning into something that just burns and burns repeatedly. So a little bit, Paul's heard his own quote, so I won't let you read that, so in the interest of time. And then finally, managing with fire, and there's been a couple good talks that got involved in that, but this actually is a controlled burn. This is also on the Greenville bench area. I'm sure it makes people really nervous when they see a controlled burn that doesn't look too controlled. But we try to do a lot of these. I'll tell you, as far as running a program like we have, controlled burns, prescribed burns are the hardest projects to pull off. They're by far the hardest. I think Tyler Thompson's back there, but I think we have some projects that have been delayed 6 or 7 years, and then you have to carry the funding over and all of that before you can get a window where you can actually burn. We also like to do controlled burns as part of our Phragmites treatment projects along the Great Salt Lake, and that also has become virtually impossible to keep fire in. So, and it was already mentioned, there's a lot of resources involved with prescribed burns. You get them done quick, but it takes a lot of resources to be able to do it. This is actually I think this is your fire, Brad, your one that you did over in Rich County. And so just to give you a picture of what we're hoping to get out of some of these prescribed burns when we do. And I think that's plenty, and I'd be glad to answer questions. Hard questions or detailed questions, some of those people that raised their hand at the beginning of my talk are going to answer those. So, thank you.
So, in back there?
Can you speak a little bit about the fire-resistant seed mixes that you use?
Again, I can talk a little bit, but there's some people that are way better at talking about that, so I'd almost feel more comfortable referring you to one of those individuals. The question was about fire-resistant seed mixes. We do use kochia for in several of our projects as a fire-resistant seed mix, but I really would rather have you talk to Tyler Thompson or Jason Vernon about the actual seed mixes. They would give you, I could give you a dumb answer, they can give you a really good answer.
Could those individuals raise their hands so you could?
Yeah, so you can find them, Tyler and Jason, so they're both right there, and Jason runs the research center, and Tyler heads up the restoration efforts for the Division of Wildlife Resources, so they're both really good sources.
The questions?
So I scared everybody away by dodging the first question, so that's good.
If there's no other questions, let's give them a hand.